Okay, here we are, 8 months into the pandemic. And how are you doing? You feeling a little stressed? Maybe burned out? Well, you're not alone. But let's face it, we can't go back to normal just yet. So it's really important that we build up our resilience. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. My guest today is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker, who's in the risk and compliance field, which even if you're not from that industry, I promise you will learn something about mindfulness and having a growth mindset. Lisa Beth Lentini Walker is a law school professor in the US and in Europe. She's held corporate secretarial, legal, compliance, ethics, governance, and risk positions at a Fortune 50 corporation, at a global travel company operating in 150 countries, and as the corporate secretary, chief compliance officer, and co-chair of the Risk Council at a New York Stock Exchange listed corporation. So let's talk about building resilience. Hello and welcome to Dr. Joe's Health and Sanity Call. I'm Dr. Joe, a wellness expert and professional speaker who helps busy people stay healthy, sane, and productive. For more information of how I can help you and your organization, visit drjoe.com, drjo.com. All right, so welcome, Lisa Beth.
It's great to be here. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Oh, as always. See, you know what? I know you from the compliance field, and here I find out that you're board certified in terms of meditation and also mindfulness, and you do coaching in that field. I mean, they seem so far removed from one another. How did you get into this?
So it's interesting, and I'm glad that you asked. I've been working in legal and compliance for decades now, and one of the things that I began to notice as I continued through my career is the level of burnout and the amount of people that were suffering. There was a study that came out not too long ago, a couple years ago, from the American Bar Association, and they found that lawyers and compliance folks are a lot of lawyers too, but lawyers were disproportionately affected by anxiety, depression, addiction compared to the general population. And what I was seeing as I was working with people was this tremendous amount of burnout. And I said, what's going on with our profession? Why is this happening? And I've experienced it too, right? I'm only human. And between everything that I was seeing, I said, you know, there really must be a root cause. There must be something that we as a profession can do about it. And so I began this journey to try to say, I love the profession that I work in. And it's really important that we're able to identify ways to have healthier outcomes. So we need to understand what's contributing to this massive overload of burnout, depression, anxiety, addiction, so that we can do something better for the people in this community, and frankly, for their families, for their clients, for the other stakeholders and companies in their lives. When you have someone who's not at their best and their job is to be an advocate, to be a guardian of integrity, how can you do that job if you're suffering? So I started this process and said, let me understand more, not just to help me, but then to talk about it in the community, because, right, I believe my career began with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And one of the great quotes from one of the great securities commissioners is, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. So if we can shed light on what's happening, we can have better dialogues and we can be kinder and better to each other. So let's start having the conversation. And that's where I started. I said, we need to have this conversation and we need to have it now.
Now, I know personally that it's not just your field that is experiencing this. We are seeing pockets within a lot of different industries, as well as, not to mention, during the pandemic, where the issues that we had are maybe a little bit more exaggerated. So when you shine the light on your industry, what did you discover? What's causing all of this?
Well, there are a lot of things that are causing this. Number one, in my industry, we often have to give really bad news that people don't want to hear. And so there's a lot of resistance. So we looked at, from a brain science perspective, how do you connect when people are already inclined to not want to welcome you to the table? And so there's a sense of isolation, which can be solved through different types of community, right? It can be solved by developing groups of compliance professionals, and there's a lot of wonderful organizations that help with that. And it can be solved by setting up expectations about how you work and how you live. And so I've been having these discussions and giving talks about well-being in the profession for the last 2 years, because it is something that I think makes a huge difference. It does help the people in my profession be better, happier in their lives. So that's where it all started.
All right, we all want to be better. We all, want to be a better version of ourselves. We also want to be productive and happier. How can mindfulness help us?
Well, mindfulness is key because it is one of the one of 4 of the resilience themes that it takes to be more resilient, right? We're all looking to be able to survive today, tomorrow, and the day after, right?
Okay, let's go back and say, what do we mean by resilience for people who are not familiar with that term?
Okay, so resilience, it's typically been defined as the way that people bounce back, but I think there's a better definition. One of the definitions that I've seen for resilience is advancing despite adversity. And advancing despite adversity, I think, is a better way to talk about resilience. When we talk about advancing, it's not just bouncing back to where you were, right? But as we look at this pandemic, we can't bounce back to where we were. That would be silly at this point.
It no longer is there. That's right.
It no longer exists, right? So I like the concept of advancing, which means that you have goals, right? You're working towards something. And that something is so unique to you and to your life vision. It means that you continue to move forward instead of stagnating or trying to live in the past. The past is all well and good, but we're not going back to the past. The past is done, right? We have to be able to move forward, honoring our truth from the past, but also saying, what's next? We're moving towards something. And despite, right, we are not moving towards this because we necessarily had that as our plan, but we're moving towards this because there's a challenge, right? That adversity is there, and adversity is there every day, whether you have to make a choice about getting upset about someone parking in your space or whatever that adversity is. We're faced with adversity every day. And how we choose to deal with it comes down to 4 themes. So I call those resilience themes. The first is having a growth mindset. The second is making sure that you have engaged connections. The third is mindfulness, which we're going to talk about a little bit. And then looking at yourself through a strength-based foundational lens, right? What are your assets and key strengths that you can bring to the table in any situation, pandemic or not?
Now, in one of your videos, you talked about change and how it's inevitable, and having that kind of mindset. And I think that falls into your first category there that you were
Growth
talking about.
mindset.
Yeah, so let's talk about that one first.
So I have 4 children. And I talk with my children all the time about having a growth mindset. It's something that oftentimes you may have as a child, but then lose as you get more specialized in your career. Growth mindset means being open to learning and not seeing failure as something that's bad. A growth mindset means that you are willing to grow and change constantly, right? You know that when you first start life, right, you don't know how to walk. And there are so many attempts to get this whole balance thing under control, or riding a bike, right? You use training wheels for a while, and then eventually you get to the point where you don't need them and you're able to balance that bike. But oftentimes as we move into adulthood, we see success as part of our identity and begin to not tolerate what we'd consider failure because it doesn't make us feel good when we don't do everything perfectly. But once you get to that point, you've lost your growth mindset. And you can't be as big and bold and amazing as you were intended to be if you don't take those chances to continue to learn. Right? During this entire stay-at-home state, I decided that I would learn some new things. So I started learning to play the ukulele, and not good. It was not good at first, but you keep on trying, and eventually you're able to play a song or two. And, maybe if I continued trying and that was going to be my focus, I'd learn to do a lot of different things, right? Whether it's playing, wonderful songs on the ukulele, or painting, or doing something different. But the point is keeping your mind open and learning and growing and developing at every turn really leads to a much better life. And you're more open to learning different things, like different skills within your field, or even a whole new field. Reinvention is a huge gift.
I think having a curious mindset really helps here, to just be open to new possibilities. And I have to say, I mean, you have 4 kids from toddler all the way into high school. So you get to see all those ranges. And I know for myself, I got 7 grandkids, and just watching them, they are so curious. And that, I think, is an essential skill to retain that growth mindset. You have to be curious about what else is out there.
100%. 100%. And the world becomes so much more beautiful when you approach it with a curious mindset. You're constantly learning new things. And frankly, I think you become a more interesting person because you've explored and you continue to learn. I mean, I tried dog sledding for the first time a couple of years ago, and I didn't know if I'd like it or not, but it was fascinating and I loved it. I don't live in a place where I can do that all the time, although Minnesota does offer quite a few days when we can. It's not a year-round activity here.
I was wondering about that. Where did you go?
It was in Minnesota. It was up a little bit north from me. And I would highly recommend it, actually, to anybody who would like to try something different.
We don't have too much of that in Florida.
Yeah, you might have to make a trip at some point in time.
But my husband and I still surf. And, we are way past the average surfing age, but we do it just for the fun and the challenge. So
it's beautiful to be out there on the waves and to, have that moment outside where you're certainly not being distracted by your cell phone while you're trying to do that.
There you go. Let me take a quick break in the conversation to let you know that this podcast is sponsored by my core business as a professional speaker. I've presented more than 1,000 programs working with organizations to ensure their employees stay high performing without risking debilitating stress and burnout. Recently, I was the keynote speaker at a conference with the theme, Catch the Wave. So I customized my program to use the analogy of surfing to teach stress management strategies. If I can help you or your organization plan an educational program that's also fun and interactive, even in a virtual setting, please give me a call. For more information, go to drjoe.com. That's just 4 letters, drjo.com. Okay, so having a growth mindset is important. And I initially asked you about mindfulness. So,
Mindfulness is so key to resilience. I mean, sitting quietly and just asking yourself deep inside, what do I want out of life? Is huge. And most people get really confused by the concept of mindfulness. Some people reject it because it just seems like it is just too out there for them. Other people say, I'd like to incorporate this into my life, but I don't know how. I mean, mindfulness is very, very easy. It can be everything from taking a little pause and doing a breath or two just to reset your mind, to looking at a beautiful scene, whether it's a live scene like you're looking outside at nature or a beautiful picture that you admire. It changes your mind about what you are focused on, and stepping away from your current challenge, work issue, dilemma that you're thinking about actually allows your brain to rewire a little bit. So I encourage people to take pauses, set some time aside, try eating mindfully, just really savoring each bite and not getting through it as fast as you can, because that's actually a better practice, which I'm sure you could talk about with
oh
people for
yeah.
ages.
Well, because how many of us have sat on the couch watching our favorite show and we're eating something and we get down to
Yes.
the bottom of the bag and we're like,
Where did it all go?
right? And you have no memory of it. So it really doesn't matter that your stomach felt some of that, your head didn't experience any of it. And so you want more because you don't feel like you had that experience. So it
Right.
is absolutely critical to be mindful when you're eating, because 2/3 of all American adults are overweight or obese. So obviously we're eating more than our body needs, but I think it's because we're not really mindful of it. We're kind of
Right.
shoving food in our face.
Well, and
Um,
most people don't step off of the little hamster wheel to be like, to
mhm,
look around and say, all right, I've been getting through things and just going through routines, but those routines may not be serving you. Mindfulness allows you to take a step back and say, is what I'm doing in service of my goals?
mhm,
Is what I'm doing in service of me as a human being? Is it in service of what I care about? And it also allows you to, I like incorporating gratitude with mindfulness, because there, there are not enough ways that you can say thank you, and not enough times that people do, to all of the people and all of the things that are amazing blessings in your life, right? Very few people sit down to eat and say, I am so thankful that there were people who were there to pick this vegetable,
mhm,
and there were transportation workers who moved the vegetable um, from the field to the store, and that I could so easily go and get this. This is amazing,
mhm,
because we've arranged a life in which people are helping each other. And
mhm,
oftentimes, because we just expect it, we don't think about everything that went into making these little miracles happen every day.
mhm. So how do you specifically incorporate mindfulness? I mean, you've talked about a couple, but do you have like any specific ways that you yourself do you practice meditation?
I
How do
do.
you incorporate these quiet times in your day?
So I practice meditation, and I have used a variety of apps to aid when I needed to have some extra help because I just didn't feel like I was capable of doing it by myself that day. So I've used everything from Calm to the Peloton app to Headspace. And on different days, different things appeal, right?
Mhm.
I am someone who likes variety, so I do like to have different guided meditations, but I also like to do things like I instituted a walk around the block after I was finished with my workday as a form of mindfulness and meditation because we're in our home all the time now. And it was really important for me to have a boundary, which previously existed with a commute. And I've heard more and more people doing a commute time,
Yeah.
kind of mindfulness break
Mhm.
between work and home, even though those locations are now, feet from each other. Just having that shift and saying, well, now I'm in home mode makes a huge difference.
I met this guy. I have to tell you this funny story because you're right. Our work and our home are kind of meshed together. And this one guy was saying that one of the things that he does is when he leaves work, like sometimes you can leave the room, close the door, maybe something like that, but he didn't even have that option. But what he would do to signal that work is over is he would change his socks. Doesn't that
I
sound so
love
silly?
that.
But that, because we have, at least back in the olden days, we had a different uniform. Some of us are wearing the same uniform at home and at work. So it's that action of just taking off your work clothes. And for him, it's just taking off one pair of socks and putting on a fresh pair of socks. I know it sounds kind of strange, but for those of you who are listening, just think about something like that, changing your shirt or, like I said, if you can close the door of your office and leave it, that's great. But the sock one was something I'd never heard of before, but he swears by it.
Yeah. So, some of this is just finding that thing that works for you to put a pause and allow you to think about things differently. The ancient Greeks used to go walking when they were doing their, great philosophical thinking
Yeah.
because the process of walking causes more blood to flow to your brain. And so they always thought this was one of the greatest ways that they could get into a mindful mindset.
Yeah. Yeah.
So find the thing that works for you. And I know that there are so many people that will tell you, oh, you have to do yoga, you have to do this. You don't have to. You should find the thing that works for you
Mm-hmm.
because we are all, unique fingerprints, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is built the same way. But part of this discovery is to say, here's what mindfulness looks like to me in a way that works for me.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, our time is almost up. Is there any other thing that you wanted to share with our listeners?
So one of the things that I did want to share before we ended was one of the themes of resilience is engaged connections. And I love what you have been doing with this podcast, Dr. Joe. I think that it's so important that there are ways that people can reach out to each other, tell stories, become more vulnerable and human. And having engaged connections can be fostered through listening to somebody on a podcast and then reaching out and saying, hey, I liked what you had to say. Let's be friends. Or, keeping in contact with people, sending that little message out to somebody that you haven't talked to in a while that you value makes a huge difference. It'll feel good for you and it feels great for them too. So one of the things that I would like to just pass along is take the time to be kind to each other, take the time to reach out to each other now more than ever. And with podcasts and all of these different ways to connect, use them to enrich your life. I'm so happy that you're doing this podcast on, the health and sanity because I think we all need it and you're really giving everyone a huge gift.
Well, I am so glad that we had an opportunity to connect, because that's exactly how our relationship started. From, reaching out to each other and chatting over the phone. Who would have thought I had anything in common with someone who does compliance and risk and ethics? Not my forte at all, but it's interesting how, even those diverse fields, the wellness and compliance, risk, ethics, can still do mesh together. And well, especially now that you're involved in the mindfulness field, but even before with compliance. So
yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much, Lisa Beth. I appreciate you coming on the show. If people want to learn more about you and what you do, what's the best way to reach out to you?
The best way to reach out is either through LinkedIn, or you can visit the website of Lumen Worldwide Endeavors. It's www.lumen-we.com.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed today's Health and Sanity Call, please subscribe to the channel and share it with others. For more information about how I can help you and your organization, visit drjoe.com. That's just 4 letters, drjo.com.